Hello.
Yeah, I was curious to see whether you were going to be like in or in the waiting room, but I guess you use the same login that I do.
I did this time, yeah. I don't normally, so I
What,
hope
how
that
do you
doesn't throw
normally
things
get
off.
in?
Hmm?
How do you normally get in? Do you have a private Zoom account?
Yeah, I've got my own that I linked to my personal email address.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, usually.
So I'll show you just a quick version of what this will look like. You can hear them chirping. Maybe you can.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, so when people arrive,
Very nice.
okay,
Yeah.
and then
There's Ray
is Ray in?
joining. There you go. Hi, Ray.
Hi, Ray. You getting an overview of the burn zone?
Nice.
Cool. Very good. Great. Well, your audio works. That's a good start. Let's see. So I think
Hopefully my brain works.
I feel the same way today.
yeah.
It's been
Let me
kind
tell
of
you, it's been a day and it's like, oh, I have a whole bunch to do on this presentation. It's like,
not gonna get there.
that was not happening.
I'm sure it'll be great. Yeah, I think Dave and I are both kind of fried from Zoom meetings today too. We're so much computer time.
Oh yeah, Zoom meetings are the best.
So good.
I have had about an hour of Zoom-free time today, starting at 9 a.m.
That's it.
Yeah, all day long Zoom meeting.
Well, I'm sorry. So this should just be boring you to tears.
This is my recreation. Zoom with a view.
Hey, what wonderful things have spawned out of complete ridiculousness, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What are you working on these days, Ray?
No, Lord have mercy. I don't know. Mostly our giant Tribal Forest Protection Act project, Soheaton. So it's
What's that? Tell me more about that.
it's a 90,000 acre Forest Service project that we asked for. So we're treating basically 6 watersheds from north of the reservation south to Newport.
Wow.
Yeah.
With all your own crews, or you haven't hired that out, or what?
No, we are. We basically have created a trifecta team with Washington DNR, the tribe, and the Colville National Forest staff, along with NUFIC, to try and tackle this NEPA. This is the first time since Tribal Forest Protection Act has been authorized that we've done a tribal forest that a tribe has taken on a project from soup to nuts. So most of the TFPA projects have picked up completed NEPA documents and implemented projects from those NEPA documents. We're doing it from scratch. We're helping prepare the planning documentation for the forest.
Huh.
And it's probably about 3 times bigger, maybe 4 times bigger than a normal Forest Service planning project. And so we've taken on key responsibilities in silviculture, aquatics, been supporting in wildlife, picked up some wetland stuff, received about $500,000 in grants to kind of help pay for some of the work. So it's
Oh my gosh.
it's a big bite at the apple. And of course, it's all about forest resiliency and forest health. And because the purpose of the Tribal Forest Protection Act is to have tribes interface with the Forest Service to bring about change on forest lands near reservations, so that, you know, if they burn up, we don't burn up, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's huge, and it takes a lot of my time because it taxes my staff, and they're freaking out all the time. And yeah.
It means you're pushing them just right.
I don't know. I'm really not in the business all the time, but it's all good.
Well, that sounds like important work.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And it's, unfortunately or fortunately, it's cutting edge. So it's treading into new ground and learning, having a lot of different folks learning each other and each other's processes, and trying to find, you know, better ways to do business through working together collaboratively. So I think it's helped the Forest Service some in identifying ways to do things better.
Right on.
But it's crazy.
Wow.
Um,
I can't imagine that.
I see it looks like BJTK is in the waiting room. I'm guessing that's BJ Kiefer. Was he one of the registered?
I think that's Bob and Jane Takai.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. They got it figured out. We were struggling to get Zoom on their computer today, but we got it noodled through.
Nice.
Ray, were you on the board when the Takais were doing their evening?
Tail end of my years on the board. I think Bob and Jane joined the board toward the end of that, and I was there when we did the easement on their property.
Cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
Rose, do you want to talk through what you're how you see the flow going, or what do you need?
Sure. Yeah, I guess in these last few minutes. So, Ray and I've kind of gone back and forth on this a little bit, but so I'm going to do a quick welcome and housekeeping stuff for a few minutes, and then I'll give a quick introduction into some wildfire basics, and using R2R as a little bit of an example there. And then I'll introduce Ray. Hopefully my introduction won't last more than 5 or 6 minutes. And then Ray, you'll have the floor for about half an hour, and then we'll do some Q&A. We've got some prepared questions. I'm gonna open up the chat, so if folks have extra questions, they can ask those. But we'll try to be wrapped up right around 7. And then, as far as driving, so Dave, you're gonna admit, or I guess I can also admit folks from the waiting room into the Zoom meeting. Dave is going to show the videos that we have to present. And then Ray, if you'll, we'll kind of hand you the mic, and if you'll just share your screen for your presentation.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Cool. Just to ease you of the responsibility, Rose, of talking and trying to monitor the waiting room, I'll take over the admitting people, because inevitably people will be coming in after the meeting has started. And then I can also monitor the chat, although you'll be able to do that obviously also when Ray gets started.
Cool.
Ray, we're recording this with your permission.
Sure. Hopefully I don't blather too much then.
Well, if you do, you can use it as evidence against you. We'll have video proof of your blathering.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Well,
Yeah.
I was just out in the garden for a few minutes, and I've got an escaped chicken. One of our flock has flown the coop, and we have 20 chicks that I've just opened the door between the brooder box and the main coop. And so they're all freaking out and going to and from, getting harassed by the other hens. And so there's a lot of chicken chaos going on right through that wall behind me. So you may
You're gonna stay unmuted so we can hear all of it, right?
Rose, do you see that somebody's waiting in the waiting room?
Yes. We're gonna let them in right at 6. So we'll just leave them right where they are for a second.
So you want to let people in and then wait for a couple minutes before you get started? Is that?
Yeah, I'll have them sit and watch the sunset for a minute, and yeah, let everyone come in.
Ray, just earlier this afternoon, I was on a call with the Trust for Public Land, and they were sharing with me some of their GIS tools that they use, some of which they're going to actually be sharing with us. And they have one layer that was kind of puzzling to me. I think it's a U.S. Forest Service wildfire risk assessment map, basically, that they've done. And where they show like high risk is basically the east slope of the Cascades, no surprise. But they really show relatively modest and lower risk in like Northeast Washington, which surprised me. I thought that we'd be much higher risk on that map.
Depends on which part of Northeast Washington. So like the, Whitman, Spokane, Lincoln, Stevens, Ferry, a lot more susceptible to wildfire than like Pend Oreille, because Pend Oreille is in that more inland maritime, right on the edge of the inland rainforest.
Yeah.
And so they call us the asbestos forest. And so, our risk is lower, but the area that we took on for the TFPA showed up in the Washington State 20-year forest health plan, or as a priority area. It wasn't as high as, say, like we're around Wenatchee or Okanagan, but
yeah,
certainly it's at the southern end of that Mosaic condition. So we get a good blend of both. But yeah, certainly you think about like 91 and Firestorm, Spokane is very susceptible. And then you look at what's happened in the 30 years since Firestorm. Those habitat types that burnt up look exactly like they looked 30 years ago. So they've come full circle, and they're in a pretty tough condition.
In other words, like ready to burn again.
Ready to burn again.
Well, when I get this data set from the TPL, I'll share it with you just to see if it makes sense to you, or if you think it's sort of wonky. Okay, so I'm going to start the video and maybe get ready to admit people. Rose, you cool with that?
Sure.
Okay, I'll do screen share. You guys seeing that?
Yep.
Okay. Now I got to figure out how to get back to the controls. Participants. Admit all. Here to come.
Here we go. All righty. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so glad to see you all here. You're probably looking for Todd Dunfield. Don't worry, you're in the right spot. My name is Rose Richardson, and I'll be your host tonight. We've got some great stuff coming for you. but we're gonna wait just a couple more minutes and wait for more folks to filter in. I think we've got a few more registered, so sit tight, enjoy the scenery, and we'll get started in a couple minutes.
Sorry, everyone. It seems that the video that you're supposed to be watching is not appearing on the screen. I thought I had taken care of that. I'll try to stop and reshare it. It's a nice welcoming spot. Are you seeing it now? There we go.
Yeah, that looks great.
Rose, I'm not seeing anyone else in the waiting room right now.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I guess we can get started then. So I think now that we're all almost here, my name is Rose Richardson. I'm the Conservation and Stewardship Specialist at the Inland Northwest Land Conservancy. I think I might have the best job here. I get to play in the dirt and plant trees all the time. So, you know, and I'm crossing my fingers that we'll be able to get out there in person here pretty soon. But for now, we're going to have a great time and learn a lot from our speaker, Ray Entz. We're going to be talking about a phenomenon that kind of affects nearly everyone in Washington state in one way or another, and that's wildfire. So, you know, whether it's a real threat to your land or you're just choking on the smoke in the summer, wildfire is a very real concern and a norm for the Inland Northwest. So, you know, we've had a pretty wet spring this year, so we're not totally smoked out yet, but I thought we'd discuss it a little bit while it's fresh in everyone's mind. And our speaker tonight is Ray Entz. He's the Director of Wildlife and Terrestrial Resources with the Kalispell Tribe of Indians. He's going to dig into climate trends and how those are impacting wildfire in the Northwest, and how he uses wildfire as a tool for land management. So before I go any further into our topic, I have a couple of really quick housekeeping items to go over. First off, I want to let you know that we're recording this Zoom call so that we can send you a link to it later and share it with others. So if you see that blinking light up there, that's what that is. And our event will be structured pretty similarly to Zoom with the Views in the past. For those of you that have attended one before, we'll start with a quick introduction to our topic. I'll introduce our speaker, Ray, and then I'll pass the mic. He'll present for about half an hour, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Some of you have submitted questions when you registered, so we'll get to those first. But if you have questions as Ray presents, please feel free to use the chat feature that's down at the bottom of your screen to submit questions as you have them during the presentation. We'll get to those after the pre-submitted questions if we have time. And for those of you that are new to our Zoom with the View, you may have noticed that when you jumped into the Zoom call, you were muted. And that's intentional. We'll be keeping everyone muted during Ray's presentation. So yeah, all right. So as I'm introducing Ray and the concept of wildfire, we're going to take a little flight over our Conservancy's rim-racked riverside property. which is directly north of Palisade City Park and west of downtown Spokane. So as you can see, the property still bears some pretty dark scars from a fire in 2017. The fire was started by an illegal campfire that got out of control in Palisade City Park. It burned almost 600 acres. And when and it very, very narrowly missed some homes that are close by. And when I say very narrowly missed, I mean by a few hundred feet. So it wasn't particularly large as fires go, but it was still really close to doing some serious damage. So, and we're still kind of cleaning up from that fire, trying to get some of those downed trees picked up, treating the invasive weeds that came in after the fire, and replanting areas where the fire burned and where fire crews dug in fire line to keep those flames contained. So now, obviously, most of us have not had that kind of close encounter with fire, right? So I'll start by saying that wildfire is kind of hard for most of us to relate to, right? It's this big natural phenomenon, and it can be kind of mysterious unless we're on a fire crew or have studied wildfire behavior for years. We've tried to avoid wildfire, so it can be kind of a mystery. So before I introduce Ray, I just wanted to take a moment to draw us back to some of those wildfire basics. And we'll start by answering just a couple questions. How do wildfires start? Who is most affected by wildfire? And what are some of the benefits of wildfire? And we're just gonna go, pretty shallow into some of these questions. We can go really deep. We're just gonna go super shallow for now. So most wildfires start in what is called the Wildland Urban Interface, or WUI, W-U-I. And this is where a populated or semi-populated area meets kind of that wildland or state park or wildlife refuge. So areas that have lots of trails or parking areas or homes. Areas like these tend to see more fires because unfortunately a lot of fires are started by human activity. So that can be where a campfire goes astray, like here at Rimrock Riverside. It can be someone playing with fireworks when they're not supposed to, not being careful with their cigarette butts, all kinds of stuff. So us as land users and as landowners can really do a lot to minimize wildfire risk as we use lands. So now like I said, we've been really lucky so far this year. We haven't really had a lot of smoky days, but we've all been there, right? You get ready for a hike, you walk out your door, and it's pea soup, right? So we've been really lucky not to have that, but we really all do feel some of those effects of wildfire to a degree. But some of us feel that pressure and that fear a lot more. I'm sure the people that live out here by Rimrock Riverside are much more concerned about wildfire than some of us that live closer into the city. And small forest landowners who make their living off of carefully managing their lands and harvesting timber can lose everything if a wildfire comes through. So Washington State has spent $150 million on average fighting wildfire to protect those lands and us. And that's an average, and that's just to put out the fire once it starts. That doesn't include the cost of constant forest management or public education, all of the preventive stuff. And that cost is pretty consistently going up as we experience more fires and as those fires become more unpredictable. So wildfire is an increasingly expensive thing for landowners and firefighters and foresters to manage. And it's also a big worry for people that live in that wildland urban interface. And so given all of that, it can be really hard to think of wildfire as anything but destructive and expensive and stressful. But that's not always the case, right? Ray will be speaking more of this later on, but the right kind of wildfire can have a lot of benefits. It can kickstart a lot of ecological processes, add nutrients to the soil, promote a healthy understory, and build a strong soil fungi community, all of which is really great for wildlife. So the big question is, how do we manage our forests so we don't become completely overwhelmed by the negative effects of fire and instead use it as a tool to promote healthy forest development? And how do we adapt those practices in the face of climate change where conditions are constantly in flux? So to answer these questions, we have Ray Entz in the house. Ray is the Director of Wildlife and Terrestrial Resources with the Kalispell Tribe of Indians. He's been there protecting lands and the wildlife that we love for 28 years. And he manages habitats and forests to ensure that they're in really good health and stay that way, which often includes using fire as a unique tool. And he's been a key part of our partnership with the Kalispell Tribe and was on INLC's board of directors for 5 years, from 2000 to 2005. During that time, he was constantly pushing the organization to find new and creative ways to protect land so we could preserve as many of our critical lands as possible. And it worked. You know, thinking outside the box, as Ray proves all the time, can lead to some really incredible stuff. And in his spare time, Ray likes to travel, especially to see wildlife that he's passionate about. And he often treks far into the wilderness over really rough terrain to catch rare species of cutthroat trout. He's got quite a bucket list of fish species that he's caught or is hoping to catch at some point. So Ray is clearly a wildlife guy and does everything with the critters and the forest in mind. So thank you, Ray, for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. All right. See if this works. Thank you, Rose. You're way too kind. I'm not all that. So we'll see how far I get through this without getting trounced by folks today. So like Rose says, I've been with the Kalispell Tribe's Natural Resources Department since its inception almost 28 years ago, and have been managing wildlife and other resources in some capacity over that time. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we're learning about climate impacts, fire, and how we're using it in our forest management systems and habitat management systems to bring our systems into a more resilient form. So a little bit about us. So you get some context for how we're organized, but the Natural Resources Department is under a single executive director with basically 2 divisions and an electrical utility. So we're a little bit more diverse than maybe you thought. So I manage the dry side of the house, and under the dry side of the house is the forestry program, one of the 7-8 programs that the tribe manages under its natural resources. And under forestry, we have a prescribed fire program, and that program for prescribed fire focuses both on forest health and fire resilience and stand resiliency, as well as habitat. So just a little bit more about us. The Kalispell Tribe once owned and occupied about 2.3 million acres across Northeast Washington, North Idaho, and Western Montana, from about Knoxon, Montana, up to into the areas in Canada, which are excluded because they're not part of the U.S. Since 1992, when I joined the tribe's Natural Resources Department, we've been acquiring and adding acreage to the tribe. So being a small reservation, less than 5,000 acres, basically owning and occupying a large landscape of 2.3 million, and then being kind of stuck on a 5,000 acre block of land really provides a lot of challenge to how we manage. And so a lot of what we do is off reservation to encourage, collaborate, and partner to bring about the kind of conservation outcomes that we want. And so now we own and manage over 11,000 acres in both Eastern Washington and North Idaho. So wildfire. Wildfire is important. It's important to the tribe to manage for that kind of inevitable outcome. And we have been working with, DNR, Forest Service, and other partners for quite a while to encourage the use of fire on the landscape, as opposed to just putting them out. And so our impetus and transition into wildfire and understanding wildfire was in 2015 when the Tower Fire started, which was adjacent to the reservation, and at its closest was within 2 miles of the reservation boundary. And knowing that the forests were in the condition that they were, gave great pause to our leadership. And the one question they asked us was, are we doing enough to mitigate the risk of fire to the reservation? And the answer was, no, we're not. So we've embarked into a much more aggressive prescribed fire program, and we've used tools like the Tribal Forest Protection Act to engage the Forest Service in the development of projects around the reservation to increase that forest resiliency and mitigate for catastrophic wildfire. I threw this in. This comes from some data from the Forest Service looking at fire over time. And as you can see, the climate has a large effect on wildfire, and both its severity and complexity. And it has just exponentially increased since the mid 2000s or 2000 and beyond to today. And what we're seeing is just a huge increase in the number of large fires and hot catastrophic types of wildfires. We've seen places in the Northwest burn more than once due to this kind of climate condition and the changes in stand composition. So it's important to know that we're in a period of time that is very unfortunate to be part of the wildland urban interface. And as people want to move out of cities, we're buying land unprecedented levels in that ex-urban environment, trying to get closer to nature. And nature isn't always in the best condition for us to be its neighbor. And so I threw in a couple of slides here to kind of show some of the effects of insect and disease, and density of trees in the forest. So we're coming off of a legacy of land use management that really set us up for the conditions that we're seeing now. Place on top of that some of the more severe impacts from climate. We're seeing insect and disease rates increasing at pretty high levels. In the planning area for our Tribal Forest Protection Act project, our forest health investigation showed that 72% of all of our dug fir stands were infected with armillaria root rot, which is very significant because it's absolutely deadly to trees. And once trees die, they just become more kindling. Now, having snags in the forest is great, and they provide lots of habitat, but having stands of snags at the kinds of densities you can see here are just not conducive to a low risk fire environment. So another part of the problem with past land use practices and fire suppression over the last century really leads to that over dense stand. So the first stand I was showing was pretty unmanaged dense stand of pine, and then you come back and you can see that if you thin it and provide some different types of underburning, you can actually get to a better stand condition. And so that's what we're promoting both through forest management and the use of prescribed fire. As you know, native populations have been using fire as a management tool for their food resources for thousands of years. And so this is not a brand new concept to anyone, but it is starting to gain a lot of traction in the West, and especially in Washington State, with the advent of the 20-year forest health plan by the state, and re-engaging in fire, where they've walked away from fire as a preventive tool and a management tool over the last couple decades. they're starting to tool up and get back into that. So tools. Fire is a tool, but we have other tools, and they're fun tools. What you were seeing is called both Pyro Shot, which is a handheld ping pong ball flare gun, and the Green Dragon, which is an automated gun that shoots the same stuff, only much more faster than, I can eject those balls out of the Pyro Shot. But basically, these tools allow us to access areas that are hard to get to. We live in an area that is about 50% floodplain and 50% forested, and some of the areas that we're trying to burn are flooded or are tough to get across during the burn windows, which are generally early in the spring and late in the fall. So we have to come up with some unique ways to try to get fire ignition without having to use a boat. And so this is one of those tools that allows us to do some remote ignition as opposed to hand ignition. Other tools, probably well aware of, is we have, type 5, type 6 engines that we use to support our fire program. And we also use UTVs. We have two UTVs. The one is a wheeled UTV and the other one is a tracked UTV that allow us to access remote terrain again, and put our control mechanisms in our prescribed burning closer to the point. And so we also have a large 850-gallon nurse / line tank that's 4-wheel drive and can get us right up into the edge of the fire, so we can control the edges and manage the fire where we need it to be. Also, we're a fairly small organization when it comes to fire, so we have to get pretty creative. And so we created this system for our track dump truck, which is a 550-gallon tank with a fire monitor on the front. That fire monitor can be operated by a single person, both driving and operating the monitor with a joystick that allows us to put fire basically 270 degrees off of the front of that piece of equipment. And that it's a track dump truck. It only puts down about 2.5-3 pounds per square inch of ground pressure. So we can get into some pretty unique habitat types and do very little damage getting water into our areas of prescribed burning. So a little bit about some of the projects that we do and some of the places that we put fire down. We use both range fire and forest fire to reduce hazardous fuels and to increase habitat. And so we also do some lop and scatter, some pile burning, and we like to put some smoke in the air at times when it's safe and good to do. So this all starts with qualified trained staff. We're a bunch of biologists, but we do have a pretty decent fire team that is made up of our staff and through volunteer going through all of the protocols to get qualified. We have fish biologists, archaeologists, foresters, and wildlife biologists all on this team of people that we basically have an ad hoc prescribed fire team. And so it's a complex set of programs. You have to have a burn plan in place to light fire, and that burn plan has to be reviewed and approved. And then you have to basically follow all of the protocols and standards within that plan so that you're managing your prescribed fire within the conditions that you set out in your plan. And if you do that, then all things are good. And if you don't, you get into trouble sometimes. I push the envelope at times and try to push my fire leadership out onto the fringes of what's in the plan. So I like to burn them good and hot in places to get some good results. This is just a series of pictures showing us burning out some understory quasi rangeland and a chaparral ponderosa pine forest. So this would be very similar to something you'd see in Stevens or Spokane County. southern Pend Oreille County where we're at. And so when you're burning, you get to be close to fire. It's nice and warm. Make your feet hot sometimes. We have some pretty tough conditions with hawthorn and different species we're trying to control, and so it makes it really tough to get your drip torch in and out safely, and we do a pretty good job. It takes a lot of good communication and coordination. So prescribed burning, like I said, a lot of different objectives. This one is just basically reducing hazardous fuels underneath a stand that's been treated or basically had some trees removed. And so we're kind of prepping that for replant and for just controlling that hazardous fuel buildup underneath the stand. This burn is a habitat burn where we basically we're doing an aspen release. And so we did some thinning of conifers around an existing aspen stand and then burned it. And basically now you get all the regeneration from aspen. Aspen, as you probably know, do not reproduce by seed. They reproduce by suckering. And so this is all basically one species or one individual tree that's cloning itself. And so fire is one of the tools we use to release that and to increase the density and capacity of aspen. And this is another one. This was a stagnant aspen stand. It was not regenerating on its own, and so we used fire to regenerate it. So that was basically a prescribed fire activity that we did without any forestry on the backside of that. So our fire regime is fairly diverse. Piles, burning range, so grasslands, floodplain grasslands, to try to encourage camas growth and to discourage monoculturing of Douglas hawthorn, which is one of my favorite species because it can be very, it can overtake an area of habitat really quickly. And so we're trying to use fire to kind of set that back as opposed to doing mastication and putting equipment on the ground. So that's it for now. I'm going to answer a couple of questions from the previous. So before, Rose, did you want to pick a question, or do you want me?
Yeah, I will pick one here. Let's see. So can you provide a couple of suggestions for responsible property management for landowners so that they can help provide spread of wildfire on their property?
Well, there's really great programs out there. I'll bring one up real quickly. Can you see that? This is the Department of Natural Resources page on cost share programs with small forest landowners. And
not quite. I think I don't think we can see that one quite yet, right?
Yeah, see that one. All right, let's do this.
Ray, I think you might need to stop sharing the original screen. I'll actually do that for you.
Okay.
And then, if you start another screen share and choose that web browser, I think we'll be able to see it.
How's that?
Not quite.
Not there yet.
All right. All right, try it now. How's that?
Nope, not seeing it. Sorry.
All right. So anyway,
We could also post the link in the chat too. So.
Yeah,
Well,
basically dnr.wa.gov/cost-share. Pretty easy to find, but it is a valuable tool for landowners to use. It's basically a 50-50 cost share or better in some cases to implement several different kinds of programs on your property. Those could be thinning, those can be limbing trees, so taking the lower limbs of trees yep, that's it. So yeah, taking the lower limbs of trees off. You can do wildlife projects. So there's a lot of different kinds of prescriptions that you can do as a landowner. There's also contacting your local fire district and asking them about Firewise programs under the district's control, and those can be those are readily available for landowners that live in that ex-urban environment and have, whether it's a large amount of property or a small amount of property, do some things that can protect their property or at least mitigate fire on their property at some level. We are, through our Indian Creek Community Forest, going to be putting together a demonstration forest for the different DNR prescriptions and programs. And so we're hopefully going to get that done this fall. And that will be accompanied with some video before, during, and after treatment, and some pamphleting and signing on a walking trail on the community forest. So we'll be able to showcase some of the examples of the programs that are out there for landowners.
Ray, just a quick follow-up on that. Is there a similar program for our friends on the Idaho side?
I am not. I'm pretty sure that Firewise exists for sure with the fire districts on the Idaho side, but I am not sure if they have a forest land owner assistance program like Washington does, but they may.
Yeah, I'll look into that and see if we can get some links out to you folks. Okay, so what is the relationship between invasive species and wildfire? You kind of touched on it a little bit in your presentation.
So invasive species are generally low-growing increaser species that pretty much take the place of grasses, and so they can add some risk, but they're not really. They basically, in their takeover of a landscape, basically remove that 0, 1 minute, 10 minute, 1 hour fuels that are native and replace it with a weedy plant. If it's a large infestation, just like a pretty thick grass field or a shrub field, even if it's native, can provide the ability for fire to move through an area. But since most of the weeds that we deal with in the Northwest are pretty low, they're basically carrying that grass level 0, 1, and 10 minute fuel types that move pretty quickly through the system. What's more catastrophic is when you start to get into ladder fuels and you start transitioning the fuels associated with noxious weeds or grasses into shrubs and low-hanging branches, and then into the crown, and then all bets are off at that point. But weeds probably have a greater effect post-fire just because of the soil disturbance and the release of the seed bed. They are generally increasers and early plants to kind of come into those burnt over areas and take off, and so they can suppress some of the native vegetation from coming back in the short term. So I've seen a lot more weed problems post-fire than causing fire or enhancing fire.
Do you think some of those diseases that you were talking about that kill off huge stands of trees, are those exacerbated by wildfire, or is the wildfire itself caused by those diseases?
Well, part of the reason we have a lot of insect and disease problems is density related issues with forest management, past forest management and legacy issues. The natural way to control, say, our malaria root rot in our area where Doug fir is less prevalent, and until you move into, say, like Ponderay County, where you get into that more mesic stand, is fire. Fire will kill those damaged and unhealthy trees and suppress root rot. And then what usually comes back is fire tolerant trees like pine or larch, and they're not as susceptible to root rot as are Doug fir and grand fir.
So how does how does wildlife respond to wildfire? And does wildlife assist at all in an ecosystem's recovery after a wildfire?
Wildlife responds, I think, it's never as simple as it's all good or it's all bad. If it's a pretty high intensity catastrophic wildfire, you're going to see a lot more short and midterm effects to wildlife and wildlife uses. What we generally find in burns that are mitigated in some way by logging practices or prescribed burning is we get more of a mosaic burn, and then you get benefits for wildlife and from wildlife in those instances. So, but if you have a large swath of land that has burnt over pretty hot, you generally get very little recovering growth in the short term, and a lot of impacts to local wildlife. And so they need to have space to move out to and occupy until those areas can recover. I witnessed the start of the 88 fires in Yellowstone and went back 30 years later, and some of those areas are burnt hot. 30 years wasn't enough to recover some of those habitats, and they're still in a pretty early recovery stage.
Thanks. Okay, we had a couple of questions come up in the chat. One of them was that graph that you showed of climate change effects on wildfire. Is that a local or regional, or is that across the world? Is that what?
That's I believe that's regional Western data. So probably like regions 1-6, and not sure what region part of California is in, but I think it's mostly Western regional data.
Okay. So of the factors that are what changes the behavior of a wildfire that might change as the climate does?
Well, what we've noticed in the last 3 years in Ponderay County is a wholesale shift in stand composition. And by that, we are seeing grand fir dying off rapidly in our systems, and that's 100% climate caused. And what happens is we were getting these prolonged periods of spring rain followed by severe drought. That's a perfect condition. I'm not a silviculturist, but I could have one answer that for you. But there's a specific fungal pathogen that will attack grand fir in that condition. And what we've been seeing is this much more rain early into the period. Like this year, we've got a lot of rain. So good for trees, but then if you follow that with drought, it's a double whammy stress on grand fir, and they can't handle it. And we've been seeing them actually move out of the stand composition. When that happens, you create an absolute enormous amount of basic low time frame fuels. So this is like 1 to 10 minute fuels that if fire gets to them, it's going to move quickly to the crown and transfer to trees that are much more resilient to fire, but without that ground to crown contact would tolerate fire much better. So having these trees that are starting to get diseased and in their stocking rates currently in the forest, all those legacy issues stack up to provide kind of the perfect storm for a lot of fuel and a lot of ground to crown contact.
And how about conditions that firefighters might experience? So they're as I understand it, things like humidity and wind, those things can really drive how a fire behaves from a firefighter's perspective. Are you seeing those things change as well?
Yeah, is as some of the evidence that you can find online through some of, where I got the slide for, that you can see that there's an increase in intensity and severity of fires, not just the numbers, or numbers of acres, but the intensity. So you're talking about hotter fires, burn more acres, and basically harm soils. They're so hot. And when you're a firefighter, the first act of firefighting is actively engage fire after you've considered safety. And so when you have that kind of condition, it can delay the kinds of human efforts you can put towards dealing with fire suppression in those instances. And you're probably going to see a lot more effects like in Southern California, where entire communities were burnt over and lost because there is no safe way to engage a wind-driven, low humidity fire like that. And when those fires get going, they can create their own weather, and push themselves and draw themselves much faster than even natural conditions that are backing them.
Right, absolutely. Okay, let's see. So what ground conditions are you looking for when you do a prescribed burn? So we've got a question here. Is burning also done on steep slopes? Would you consider doing that, or?
Okay. Yeah. We burn routinely on slope ground. It's how you apply the fire that's more important than applying the fire. So if you apply the fire at the bottom of the hill, it's not going to stay within your prescription likely. It's going to get pretty hot and big and probably do more damage to live trees. So when you're dealing with slope fire, you generally burn from the top down or from side to side, depending on what your prescription is. So if you want a hotter fire, say to remove brush competition, you might start at the top and do strips of fire, say left to right across that slope. And that'll create more flame length and a little bit more heat. If you want a lower heat mosaic burn, you might strip from the top down and let the fire slowly move downhill, and it won't carry heat as much as it will as it moves uphill.
Okay. So let's see. So kind of along the same lines as the root rot and everything, do beetles also die when there's a fire, either prescribed fire or wildfire?
Yeah. Fire is a great way of forest actually cleansing itself of a disease, whether it be root rot or a bug infestation. Basically, it eliminates the food. And so, unfortunately, if your stocking rates and drought conditions are in such a way, if you stop a fire that killed a pine beetle population, they may just move to another stand and create the same problem all over again. So it's really not spot treating, but trying to treat conditions as they exist and not forget about what else you have, so you're not just creating a source for another problem. So you're dealing with your overstock stands in that place, and then trying not to just move your bugs from one place to another.
Totally.
But root rot's a tough one because it moves like 3 meters a year underground and root to root contact. So it basically needs like a stand replacing fire to nullify its movement.
Oh my gosh.
And a lot of ways we deal with that from a forestry perspective is to go in and remove diseased trees and then replant with more species that are less susceptible to those pathogens. And so you might do a stand conversion from, say, a Doug fir, grand fir stand to a ponderosa pine larch stand. And as climate changes, that's probably what's going to be more conducive for that site in the future as things get warmer.
Makes sense. So when you're doing your prescribed burns, or just in your understanding of prescribed burns in general, how often do they get out of control? Does that ever happen?
Oh yeah. That's why they're so strict on having burn plans and being compliant with your burn plans and not having people like me in charge. I'm just a firefighter too when it comes time to burn. So I'm just the guy with the torch, listening to the burn boss who's in charge of making sure that he's meeting all of those conditions. But it happens. The last one, it happens quite frequently, but generally the conditions surrounding a prescribed burn are such that even if it does go out of prescription, it's relatively easy to capture. Sometimes that's not the case. I think there was one in Arizona that burnt a few million acres and it started as a prescribed burn, but they were out of prescription when they started.
Oops.
So weather conditions were not the way they should have been according to the burn plan.
Okay.
That happens. I mean, it just happens, but you got to have the strength of character to call burn off and just say, we're not doing it. Conditions aren't right. Wind's not right. Our smoke management isn't going to be right. So we're not going to do it. And so we're always thinking about those things even throughout a burn so that when we're doing it in pieces, we can actually stop if the conditions change and we start to see fire behavior that is not within what we have written down.
Right. So I worked very briefly with the DNR on the west side, and they don't do prescribed burns, period. And it's mostly a public perception issue. So how have you guys dealt with that?
We struggle with this issues with public perception, and generally that's with smoke. Smoke management is a huge issue. When you're in a rural county like Ponderay, you have a lot of retirees basically in that area, and so smoke management is a real issue, especially with public health crises like the one we're in now. We didn't do a spring burn, and no one in the Northwest did a spring burn this year because of COVID. And that was the fact that, one, it was going to be difficult to manage a prescribed fire team in a social distancing perspective, and the fact that adding smoke into the system with a respiratory pandemic, not a really good idea. And so we're pushing for a fall burn season this year, but we're not 100% sure we're going to have one, just because if things get funky with the virus, then we don't want to add another vector of irritant and potentially harm people's health. So we're cognizant of that as well when we're burning.
Absolutely. Cool. So I guess we've still got a couple questions about the kind of logistics of it. So how big of an area do you typically burn, and what decides that?
It's usually the conditions in the prescription. So if it's a post-harvest, it'll be the size of the harvest unit. So if the harvest unit was 80 acres, the burn's going to be 80 acres. When we're doing our range burning, those are a lot larger because we don't have the intensity of fuel. So we're dealing mostly with grass and small shrubs, and we can burn larger areas because we can manage the edges of those better with either a foam line or wet lines, mowed lines, that kind of thing, so we can piece it up and burn it safely on larger swaths. But I would say our burns generally are somewhere in the 20 to 120 acre range for a day.
Cool. All right. And what do you do once you've burned it to discourage weeds and promote tree growth, or the species that you want anyway?
Well, the first thing is trying to deal with weeds before you burn. So having an active weed management integrated weed plan is important. So we basically, whether it's mechanical fire or chemical, we're trying to maintain control over those because they are increasers, they are early colonizers. When you disturb soil, they're going to come in. And so we basically have a fire monitoring program that does all of our post-fire monitoring. And if we see problems, then we just add it to the list of things to manage. So, but we've got a pretty good handle on weeds on the reservation. We have them, but we try to keep them managed so we don't have a lot of vectors for new infestations when we do a burn.
Okay. And let's see, we got one more question here. Is there fire-specific nutrient recycling benefits? Can you describe that a little bit?
Probably not as much as somebody who's really into fire ecology. But yes, I mean, you mentioned it, the mushrooms, and some, you're basically replacing some of the nitrogen back to the soil. So there are benefits to burning. We, like camas responds very well to burning. It reduces some of the competition level for your early grasses. And so it helps camas, which is a first food for the tribe, an important one. It also is something that we mostly for habitat regeneration. So like the aspen and the cottonwood and willows respond really well to fire as disturbance plants, and those are good food for wildlife. And trying to get a mosaic of things on the ground. But yeah, I'm sure there's tons of scientific benefit for burning. I see them, but I don't really know them. So I'd just butcher it if I tried to answer.
Sometimes that observed benefit is good enough, right? Well, cool. I think unless anyone has any more questions, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Ray, for sharing your experience with us. This has been a really great presentation, and thank you for answering all of our questions. And I want to thank the tribe too. They've been an incredible partner. Ray, you're a good vector for them to us, but they've been an incredible and dynamic partner for us, with and for us for a long time. So thank you so much for sharing what you know. And for those of you that are interested in another Zoom with a View, we've got another one coming up on July 28th, Tuesday, July 28th at 6 p.m. Same deal, we'll be talking about aquifers at that one. So if you're curious about water quality and our aquifer here in the Spokane area, tune into that one. And thank you all also for joining us and learning and growing with us here on our Zoom with the Views. That's what it's all about. So with that, I will say good night and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.